Holy cow! Welcome to another broadcast of Bricks Behind the Ivy.
Hey, Cub fans! Welcome to another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. I am your hostess, the mostest, Jeff Candid Cubs Ragauskis, and with me today I have a very special guest, Mr. Mike Waller from CubsPS Plus, one of the many excellent programs over at the Bleacher Bunch. Mike, thank you so much for joining today. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited for this. This is good. I love getting in a new show and reaching a new audience, but I've listened to your show. It's great, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, vice versa. I'm excited to finally kind of get, some, I guess we're still on camera, but faces and actual one-on-one interaction with, podcasts that I've listened to for a long time, and just kind of trying to dip my toe in this water in the last year. And I feel like sometimes when I'm doing these things, it's like meeting my heroes, because I've listened admirably to every Cubs podcast I could find to soak in that information, and yours is definitely one of those on the rotation of the massive amount of baseball information I digest every week. So this is a really cool moment for me as well.
I appreciate that. There's a lot out there. It takes a lot of time to get through it all. But
Manto always says he's the 69th Cub podcast.
Yes. That's right.
So a tradition at Bricks Behind the Ivy, we always like to start every episode with your Cubs backstory. And I really want you to kind of talk about, how you became a fan, maybe a favorite player, and then what led to CubsPS Plus. But also, before we get into that, today's episode, we are going to talk about potential ideas, either free agents or trades, 2 players each, on players that are going to improve the 2025 Cubs based on potential deficiencies they had in 2024 and what's available and what we think could be available. So that is the overarching theme. But with that being said, let's start with your Cubs story. How did you get into the Cubs, and what led to CubsPS Plus?
I'm a classic Cubs fan, WGN prime era. I mean, I grew up in Iowa, central Iowa, so I did have the Cubs AAA team in town anyway, which kind of led me that way. But I really, it was kind of funny. My baseball life kind of came full circle, because I really sort of first found baseball. My parents were Yankees fans, and one thing I've talked about on my show a lot is you become a fan of whatever you watch when you're a kid as your default starting point. And my parents both grew up in Iowa in families that like baseball. And who could you see in the 60s on TV? It was the Yankees all the time. So they became Yankees fans. And the 1981 World Series between the Yankees and the Dodgers was really kind of my first memory of really kind of getting into something with baseball. It had always been around it. We had gone to a Yankees game in Kansas City, I think in 1980. But the 82 season, I found WGN and I was hooked. And so it was awesome to have, at that age, I was 8 years old. So, I'm not staying up crazy late. So it was awesome to have that in the summer when I'm at home. I found Rhino kind of in 83 before he popped. He was just kind of I found him to be an interesting player. And then when he exploded in 84, I was 10 years old and he was my guy for life. Kind of a cool story on that. My best friend and I both same boat, and we were both Rhino guys. And probably way before he actually would have been a Hall of Famer, we were in middle school, and we said, when Ryan Sandberg goes to the Hall of Fame, we're going to go to the induction. And then, of course, his career works out the way it went, and he got inducted. And all of a sudden, I called him in 2005 and said, we're going, right? And he's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So we went, and it was an awesome weekend, and it was cool. But so it was really following the Cubs, and lived and died. I got my first heartbreak in 1984 with that Padres series. So I got indoctrinated at that young age. And after that, just followed ebbs and flows. I started college around the time Maddox left. And so the team dipped, and there was a work stoppage, and I had other things going on in my life. So I kind of, not that I stepped back entirely, but instead of watching every day, I sort of more remotely followed. And 98, like everybody else, I wasn't completely gone, but 98 brought me back for sure. And then they had that run through 2003. So on and on and on. Then I had kids, when the Cubs took their dip after 2008, I had young kids with more stuff going on, so it was easier to step away. And obviously 2014, 2015, 2016 brought it back. And coming out of that, I was following baseball a lot. And then 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, 2022, I had left a job took some time off. I was burnt out. I had to find something to do, and I've loved Cubs podcasts, and so I love the medium, and I thought I'm going to try it because I've got some time now. And so, perfect time, right? July 2022. Who wants to listen to more Cubs content than when they're absolutely in the tank? But that's when I launched CubsPS Plus, and I kind of like stats and playing with numbers, and I don't necessarily. It's not a totally geeky number podcast, but I do try to base all my arguments in reality and stats, and try to look at trends. And so I thought the OPS Plus was kind of a cool spinoff to go CubsPS Plus. And then it's about a year ago this time I connected with Bleacher Bunch and Danny Rocket over there, and went from just my own feed to Danny's trying to assemble more fan content over there. So there's one feed, and maybe ideally we'd have something every day. We're not quite to that point, but got some cool shows over there that we can talk about later. But that's my Cubs thing, and I just love getting behind a mic. It's helped me follow the Cubs in a different way. I'm sure you've found the same thing. I mean, it's one thing to watch every day, and another to watch a game. It's a bad season. You're in August. It's the team's going nowhere, but you're watching to see, like, is this middle reliever going to be able to come in with bases loaded and get out of the inning, or can this guy go 2 innings? Like, you're actually asking the questions and watching in a different way than I would as a fan.
Yeah, and I think for myself, and I'm sure like you can relate, I've been the Cubs guy of every building, office, school, classroom that I've ever been in. And there's a lot of folks at times are like, hey, like, you should be on TV or you should be on the radio, like, so much, blah blah blah. And I was like, yeah, that's ridiculous. Like, and now, like, we live in a moment where, like, having that start, having that entrance is easier than ever. Like, it's the cost of a microphone and a camera if you're going to do video, or just a microphone for audio. And I was like, what the hell? Like, let's see if people are interested. Like, I was the most popular guy at the water cooler with a certain segment, so maybe I'll be one of the most popular guys on a podcast network somewhere. So yeah, and it's I think it's been a saving grace for my wife, who like used to have to digest like the nonsense that I had to like get out of my head to like to talk about post game.
For sure.
And so that's I think she really appreciates this more than maybe any other brickhead out there who listens to PPTI each week. 2025, the season is fastly approaching. Hopefully, it's snowing Chicago today, so it feels a lot farther than it usually does when the snow's on the ground. But it'll be here before we know it. And I think there's some ideas out there, lots of folks talking about like what the Cubs could do. We were talking about like budget constraints and what part of the market they're going to work in, and all these things that have been released. And at the end of the day, like, we don't really know what's going to happen. We have an idea financially, like what they're not going to do, which is frustrating. But I think we both have some ideas on how to address this market, maybe via trade or via free agent, to improve parts of the team that the Cubs need to improve to be either a division winner or a playoff team in 2025. So I think we've both prepared 2 players each. And Mom would not be proud if I did not let my guest go first. So I'm going to let you bring your first idea of what is a player or a trade or a free agent you think can improve the 2025 ball club.
Yeah, so I'm going to focus probably in a different direction than you. I'm going to focus on, I'm going to start with the bullpen, but it's going to be bench and bullpen. And I want to preface that by saying, kind of to the point you started with, the Cubs have a plan. There are certain money issues that come into play with the Cubs, whether we think they should or not. But they also have a track record. Their track record tells me they're going to spend probably around the CBT. So even though I'm throwing out like relievers, bench guy, may not be super sexy, I think there's a lot more that they're going to do with this team. So I'm certainly not selling my 2 guys as get these 2 guys and we've won the offseason, because got to do a lot more than that. But I'm going to go bullpen. So I'm not going to go the typical closer route. It's possible the Cubs have an interest in Tanner Scott. For the most part, look around the league. The Dodgers, Yankees did not go out and pay for top closers. Most teams don't do that. A few do. San Diego traded for Hader, and then the Astros signed him this last year. But what we saw last year was the Cubs blew a ton of saves early because the bullpen was not ready out of the gate. We saw them really struggle to piece it together into like early June. And eventually they sort of got it. I think they're in a much better position right now with hard throwing arms than they ever have been in the last 5 years. I think even if Porter Hodges doesn't prove to be a closer, I don't think you have to go into the season giving him 2 months of run. I think they need to stack up arms in that bullpen that could supplement. And if it has to be a closer by committee or somebody else has to step up. But unlike last year when it was, I think they went into last season with Alzolay and then Julian Merriweather, who was basically hurt from the start. And then it was Hector Neris. And Neris, we knew was not a closer. Stack up arms. So one guy I'm looking at coming from the Braves is I really like AJ Minter. I love the fact that he's lefty. He's very well proven in clutch situations. He's been through the wars. He's been on good teams. He's helped win playoff games. His projection's not that high. Well, we'll see what bidding gets into. Those are always tough, but like SpotTrack has him estimated at $3 million. So he's not even going to cost a ton of money. I think that price will go up because I do think he's probably one of the better arms on the relief market, but he's not a closer. Although he has closed some games in the past. So he's a guy that could potentially step in. But I like that profile. He gets a lot more swing and miss. Cubs have not had, well, they had the lefty killer and Mark Leiter Jr. with that splitter. They had Drew Smiley. His splits really read more like a starting pitcher. He didn't have pronounced lefty splits. The Cubs haven't had a really strong lefty in the pen since maybe Andrew Chafin. Yes. So I think on that front, I think AJ Minter is my guy.
Yeah, I think I like that pick a lot. 3-pitch pitcher, he's fastball, cutter, changeup, left side. Yeah, the Cubs have really been missing like a lefty neutral or a lefty neutralizer in that pen. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Drew Smiley wasn't going to cut it. It was just nightmare fuel every time he came in. I had nothing against Drew Smiley. It just wasn't designed to be a lefty specialist out of the bullpen. And he's also was getting paid like starting depth money, which at the time made sense for the Cubs. But at the end of the day, like they had to deploy him the way they decided to deploy him for the need. And it just he didn't fit that profile. It's the same issue with Hector Neris. Like, and that was more out of necessity on health. Like he wasn't a closer, but like he's a team guy and has pitched in clutch situations, so they thrust him into that role, and yeah, it didn't work. I think like there's no argument there, and it was a terrifying ride, and there just wasn't enough strikeout stuff. But yeah, I think that's the one thing I do really like about this pick as well, is not just the left side of the plate, but it does address a deficiency that I think everyone can admit to, that Cubs have an average K rate on their pitching staff of starters and relievers. Like they're not striking out at the volume that like you'd want. When you have guys like in the modern game, you want to deploy someone who's going to limit the randomness, the noise that comes from baseball. And to me, that's BABIP. It's again, as soon as the ball is in play, literally anything can happen. So how do you diminish that? Strikeouts. And yeah, the Cubs, are ranked 11th for their pen health strikeouts, and I think a lot of that was potentially carried by some of the weapons they deployed later in the year. But that's not going to cut it. And you look at the top of this list, for bullpen strikeouts. Ironically, there's not a ton of the playoff teams that enter the chat for this discussion. You see Atlanta and Philly right up there, and Seattle. Like these are teams that are very pitching heavy. So obviously there's a balance, but they're like, you have Cincinnati as well as a top 10 team on bullpen strikeouts. But yeah, Cubs landing at 11th, just above the White Sox. I mean, I would argue the White Sox weren't trying to put together a competent bullpen, so to be around them in any ranking is not where you want to be. So yeah, I think it's a great pick for the bullpen, especially given the handedness and his ability to induce strikeouts.
Yep. And again, there have to be other moves too. But and there are other relievers in that tier. I mean, if you want to talk about Blake Trinan, Ryan Stanek, they're going to be all probably similarly priced. They have all got good backgrounds. They all have playoff experience. There are going to be guys available for the Cubs to bring in and make that pen better. Yeah,
I think that's going to take a while to sort out too, which is I'd say par for the offseason course now. Obviously, we need the Juan Soto decision to happen, which potentially might happen by the winter meetings. but Roki Sasaki being part of the 2025 international free agent, as confirmed by Rob Manfred, really pushes that out. And I just don't see a lot of that reliever market necessarily speeding up until, people know where Roki's going, and that might delay the rest of that mid-tier starting rotation depth. I don't want the Cubs to sit and wait if they're going to be involved in Roki and not to a move because they're going to wait on Roki Sasaki. I hope they have guys in line and then get land Roki Sasaki, luck forbidding. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how that market plays out.
For sure.
So speaking of waiting and Soto and money, the first player I'm going to bring is just an opportunity for me to go on a rant about Juan Soto, because I think the Juan Soto is a perfect player for the perfect moment for this team. And I've heard every argument under the sun. I've had discussions with folks on Blue Sky, Twitter, in person. Juan Soto's salary is probably going to push 43 45 mil AAV. He's going to get a long-term deal. There are just so many advantages to having a player like Juan Soto on your team. First of all, I feel like it makes the recruiting effort of a player like Roki Sasaki a lot simpler. If you're indicating to a player like Roki Sasaki that you're willing to add a player like Juan Soto to raise the floor of your team. Second of all, the Cubs are in desperate need of a star. A star for this offense would raise the tide of this entire group. If there is a player in this lineup, ideally more than one, in which you can game plan around, or a team has to game plan around, then the mistakes are going to happen. The laziness, the mental lapses are going to happen for the rest of the lineup, because there's going to be so much focus on Juan Soto. So that's going to help these other guys. They're going to get better pitches to hit because they're after Soto or before Soto. There's just a whole dynamic in raising the entire lineup up. He's 26 years old, fits into that young player that you want. This is a player that never reaches free agency. Some people wait their whole lives to produce a prospect of Juan Soto's caliber. There are very rarely any players of Juan Soto's caliber that can produce. That's why he's a generational talent. He's from the left side of the plate, which is where the Cubs have longed for slugging to make right field not suck again. So beyond the Sammy Sosa, right field has not been the best place to sit because we have a lot of pull happy right-handed hitters at Wrigley, so everybody wants to sit in left field bleachers. So help right field. Adding Soto to your team and having his name synonymous with the Chicago Cubs in perpetuity of existence is only going to be an advantage. This is a guy that is at this moment potentially a first ballot Hall of Famer if he never plays another game. And maybe that's a little ridiculous, but his numbers are absurd. And obviously we haven't seen some of the health issues as with other players. We haven't seen, any deterioration of his skill. The on-base percentage is insane. The slugging is insane. The patience is insane. Yes, there's defensive questions for this guy, but you let it go because of how much he can lift your offense. And you're the Chicago Cubs. You're worth nearly $6 billion. And the grandstanding comments from outside pundits, not necessarily very different than the Crane Kenny show we got last year, talking about all the oodles of money that Jed was going to have to spend. This year, it's just been secondary sources talking about how they're not going to be in the top tier of certain free agent markets because that's just not what they're going to do. Go over to CBT. You did last year. You went over to CBT, and I don't think you were supposed to. And if no one was mad about that, then why does Jed Hoyer still have a job? Why does he continue to be the president of baseball operations if there is that much frustration? Because it feels like the messaging now is the reason they're being so careful with budget is because they don't want to go over the CBT, because it's they're hedging their bet of if this is another season in which we're not that great, then we're below the CBT and we've delayed the penalty, or we still have room to add players at the trade deadline, and we're going to target those guys like Walker Buehler who are going to be these 1-year prove-it deals. So if things fall apart, we still have options to trade, and that's not the mindset we should be 4 or 5 years into the Jed Hoyer era. We should be hitting the gas. We should be adding players to make this team better. And sitting out Juan Soto, not even giving a phone call, not even addressing it. I know Cody Del Mundo is going on this rant. I know Bleacher Nation just released an article talking about the only reason the Cubs aren't in it is straight up money. I saw Megan I can't think of her last name.
Montemaro.
Montemaro. Yes, that's what I wanted to say. Megan Montemaro write an article and with quotes from Tom Ricketts where I feel like he just sold Jed to the Wolves. They're just like, well, we give them the money and they do what they can with their budget. Come on. No, you're driving the car. If you are a modern baseball owner and you wanted Juan Soto, you pick up the phone, you call Jed and say, go figure out how to get Juan Soto. Don't throw this man under the bus. As one of the first moments that I felt really bad for Jed. And then the tea leaves of what I talked about on Sunranto about a week ago of Joshua Kuznick talking about like Jed Hoyer and his front office group is a lot of great baseball minds, but like they only can do with what they're given by ownership. Like there's just a lot of commentary out there about like where the directive is coming from, why they spend the way they do. And now today, even dating this recording, we're talking about trading Cody Bellinger, and the idea floated around of they would take mid-tier prospects for the ability to move his contract. Move his contract for what? Like so you can go get Soto? Because like you've missed that boat. Like he's met with everyone that we think he's going to meet with. So what are you moving the money for? Who are you going to go get with that money? Or are you moving the money to just lower the budget? It just, none of this adds up. And sitting out another generational talent, I'm not including Shohei Ohtani in that. I truly believe the Cubs were interested in getting Shohei Ohtani. He was never interested in leaving the West Coast. So I don't know how likely that was going to happen. But sitting out Juan Soto is 100% the wrong decision.
Well, and to your point, at least with Shohei Ohtani, there are reports that the Cubs made the call. The Cubs put an offer on the table. Like whether I've heard people say it wasn't a serious offer, whatever, but I also don't believe. I think Shohei Ohtani was always going to the Dodgers, and I think that became very clear in the reporting after, especially with some of the hurt feelings in Toronto, because I think Toronto really got leveraged in that deal to make the Dodgers move faster. But to your point, like, yes, yep, exactly. And that's what makes this offseason hard, because we already know we have a decade of history plus of the Ricketts, and we've got 5 years of Jed Hoyer, who operated under Theo. And Theo was the one that would sometimes talk. He would be a little bit loose with the lips. Tom Ricketts never says anything. Jed Hoyer's never said anything. So we know we have to read between the lines, read the tea leaves. And also, there are always a million reports that come out like Cubs are doing such and such, or they're looking at so and so, and might be true, because in reality, you could have a fully functional, aggressive ownership, aggressive team talking to a lot of guys. You're not going to sign them all. Juan Soto may have decided this week he never wants to leave New York. That might be the reality. But you got to take that shot. And the frustrating thing I have with the budget is, number one, Tom has shown he will spend before. And it wasn't even just leading up to the ring. It's not like he's spent up to the ring and then cut it back. 2018, 2019, I think even 2020, although finances got weird with the COVID weird season, the Cubs were top 5 payroll in baseball. They were top 3 for, I think, 2019. Yeah. So the idea that they're going to scale it back, and so you mentioned the Bellinger potential trade. I have to know more than just what the trade for Bellinger is. If they dump him from mid-tier prospects, I'll be disappointed, but it won't be about the trade. It'll be about what do they do with that money. If that money means like, okay, maybe they're not going to be in on Soto, but like if we've seen reports the Cubs were sitting out the top of the starting pitching market with like Corbin Burns. If getting Bellinger off the books means that maybe they're going to make a push for Burns, or maybe they're going to go for Anthony Santander. Maybe they like his profile more than Bellinger. Then I'm okay with it. Like, do what you can, get out of Bellinger's contract. You probably have to eat some money, hopefully get a couple decent prospects. But I really don't see the Cubs, given what they've said. And the one thing I'll say for the Ricketts is they will obscure the truth. They will dance around the truth. They will do a lot of things. I cannot remember very many times where Tom Ricketts actually lied. So when he says our target is to spend, yes, by all means, call us out. Um, and I will own that comment. But when Tom Ricketts says his goal is to spend around the CBT every year and then address it as the season goes, I take him at his word because he's done that a lot. So the idea that I saw some doom and gloom on social media today with the Bellinger stuff that they're going to sell off Bellinger, start a rookie out there and just keep the money. Like that's not something they've done. And so I don't believe it's something they will do. The question is, if they get rid of Bellinger, is it going to be another version of Hosmer Mancini where you go for a couple half measures to kind of half step it in? Or are they going to maybe saving that money frees them up to maybe they do decide to go get Tanner Scott and pay $20 million a year for a closer? I don't see him doing it because most teams don't. And it certainly is against Jed's MO. But I will need to know what comes next, not just the Bellinger trade.
Agreed, and I think that is such a hindrance, to my ability to really assess the commentary on it because, yeah, exactly that. Knowing what it leads to, like my first thought process is like, all right, well, if you trade Bellinger and like, I guess like goes back to the Soto argument, like prospects, players, all those things are currency that you have. And one of the things you can do to keep organizational health and also like make your team better is to just spend money because you don't have to trade prospects to address things. You don't have to trade. You can keep these guys in your system. So like when I think about if you're sitting out Soto, if the idea that Toronto potentially very likely swings and misses on Soto, given, I think that if he's going to stay in the AL East, it's likely going to be with the Yankees. But, I think they might pivot and shop Vlad Guerrero Jr., who's on a year deal ending. So if you're moving Bellinger to then use that space to lock up long-term Guerrero in a deal, then, I feel a little bit differently. But then also on that, the counterpoint to that is I'm mildly frustrated with the idea of instead of going after the guy for pure money, you're going to give up prospect capital to acquire a guy to then pay him because you could have just used money and then kept all those prospects and had that organizational depth that I feel like they're trying to strike that balance for. And like a counter to your point, or not a counter, just an additional comment to your point about like the Hosmer hedging and Mancini hedging, like that really bit them in the ass, pardon my French, last year because they had so much dead money going towards the CBT that potentially, if that is the artificial cap for this organization, they were paying Mancini, they were paying Tucker Barnhart, they were paying all these guys that were not like they're literally not playing because they gave them these 2-year like pillow deals that tried to only alleviate a problem. So if we go that way, didn't we learn our lesson? Like that's so, but it is November 21st. Happy birthday to my brother, by the way, if you are listening.
Happy
birthday. But it's November 21st, and like we know nothing. The only team that's done really anything is the Angels. And like they are just, I'm not sure what they're ever.
And they've made a bunch of moves I don't want the Cubs making.
Yeah, exactly. So like I'm not upset about like, and obviously the Cubs, made a trade, which is another subject for another time. But there's not like this huge free agent market, and the Cubs have missed out. Or there's so much time left. The winter meetings are still coming. Baseball offseason has like become this like the snore compared to other sports. So it's not like it's over. However, like the early indications and what has come out is troubling. It's troubling. So it really feels that pessimistic side. And here at Bricks Behind the Ivy, I feel like empathy is the driver of content, and that empathy like begins to wear a little thin when it's starting to feel like a pattern. And as a numbers guy, like once is an accident, twice is a trend. So I'm hoping this isn't a trend of the new situation. And if like last point on like Tom and the article in the Tribune, which I recommend you read, support all the folks who write about the Chicago Cubs, especially for their full-time job. Like these people do work really hard to get these things. Like him talking about Jed's doing what he can with his budget. If Tom was really upset with how last year ended, he wouldn't have Jed Hoyer sitting here in a lame duck contract. He has hedged his bet politically. Like he's saying he's given Jed all the resources and he's not giving him a sign off of confidence, nor is he sending into the ether that he's finding what's going on acceptable either. So like he has hedged his bet. He's made the comment. They've set him up to either fail or succeed. He will retain his job if the Cubs make the playoffs. He will lose his job as the scapegoat if the Cubs don't make the playoffs. And all of that is going to be dictated on the budget that he's been told he's allowed to operate with.
Well, I would add one point to that. So I don't know what budget he actually gets. I know we've heard the comments from Crane Kenny and from Tom about having more money to spend. One, Jed has never fired back, and maybe that's just Jed being Jed, but he has never challenged that. And number two, the Cubs outspent the Cardinals by $20 million. Everybody else in the division, they outspent by $50 million. So, and all the dead money is off the books right now. The Cubs are not carrying any salary into 2025, which is glorious. But they have enough money. If they spend at the levels they've been spending, there's enough there to win. So Jed has to figure out a way to spend it better. I mean, I would, and that's not to, I was going to say, that's not to defend. I mean, the Cubs they have the third most expensive fan experience in baseball. They have crazy expensive ticket prices. Beer bats are $30-$40. So go spend more. But merely spending $235 to $240 million while half the league isn't even trying, is not really an excuse. Like they spend enough to put a better team out there.
Now that I've gotten the Juan Soto out of my system, well, not really, but I've at least put it into the universe that's how I feel about it. I don't think I'll ever potentially get over it, but we'll see. I don't know. Time is healing. Your second player, where I'm thinking you're focusing, since we've got the bullpen, you said you were looking at a bench piece. Who are you looking at for the Cubs bench in 2025?
So I'm going to bring up a guy that I don't think is probably on the radar, but I think of the idea of this player, the kind of the profile he fits, whatever. So when you look at the Cubs last year, the Cubs, I think part of the reason why the offense was flawed, we know Dansby Swanson played for weeks with a knee injury. We know Nico Horner played through a broken hand and came back after 10 days with a hamstring. We know Cody Bellinger was back on the field in about 10, 12 days after cracking 2 ribs. I've had rib injuries that weren't fractures before, and I'm not an elite athlete, but like you feel that breathing for weeks. So the idea that he lost torque on his swing and didn't have as much power doesn't surprise me at all. And part of the problem with these is the Cubs, Craig Counsell played his bench in Milwaukee, and they didn't play the bench hardly at all last year. Miles Mastrobuoni, for all his faults, went through a stretch. I tweeted about it. At one point, he was 0 for 13 or 0 for 14 on the season, and he had faced nothing but elite closers in Dylan Cease. When you're not playing for weeks on end and you're expected to hit some of the hardest pitchers in baseball, it doesn't work. And they didn't give those guys breaks. I don't think it's any surprise that the Cubs got so much better the second half of the season after the All-Star break. Remember they had that odd series with the White Sox where they had the Friday, Saturday, and then had Sunday off. So after that, they had like 2 days off that week. And then they went on a stretch of like a month plus where they had 1 day off every single week, very regular rest. And all of a sudden they were hitting the ball so much better than they had all season. The Cubs need to get a bench that Craig Counsell will play. Dansby Swanson should have a day off every 7 to 10 days. Nico Horner should have the same. So the bench, we've already seen Patrick Wisdom got designated for assignment, so he's not going to be there. I'm going to guess that I think there's a strong chance Nick Madrigal gets non-tendered tomorrow. So when this comes out, I might look really stupid. But that bench has to be upgraded. And I think there are a couple ways to do it. They can do it with kids. Everybody's calling for Matt Shaw, Owen Casey. You could have Matt Shaw on the opening day roster and get him 2 to 3 starts a week in the beginning. Like you're not putting the burden of, okay, we're going to get rid of Itzhak Paredes and you have to be our third baseman. If you don't pan out, we're going to fail. You don't put that pressure on him. You let him play a couple times a week. He can spell Nico for a day while Nico goes and gives Dansby a day off. He can play a couple times for Paredes. He could DH once. And then if he's hitting the ball, work him in, gets more time. Eventually he takes somebody's job, and that's a great problem to have. But on that line of guys that people would want to play, I look at a guy like Yohan Moncada for the White Sox. So obviously he had a pretty big contract with them that just ran out. And he came up as I think when he was in AAA with the White Sox, I got to see him here in Charlotte. We have their AAA team. He was the number 1 prospect in baseball, I think, when they picked him up. I think it was the Chris Sale trade to Boston. And he had some good years. I mean, he as recently as 2021, he was a 3.7 WAR player by Fangraphs. Was pushing 800 OPS. He's a guy that's had power. He had 25 homers in 2019. He's driven in runs. He's stolen double-digit bases before, but he's not a guy clearly over the last 3 years that has shown he can handle a major league workload. He's had a ton of injuries, but when he's healthy, the talent is there. His raw ability is there. And he's a guy that maybe you do pick up on the bench. Maybe he is a bench player. Maybe he gets a start or two a week to get Dansby or Nico off their feet. He's a guy that's been around. He could pinch hit. And again, like it doesn't have to be on Moncada, but he's a guy instead of necessarily going. And I think he'd be pretty cheap. He's projected by Spot Track for about $2 million. So, that's Patrick Wisdom money, basically. And you get a guy who potentially has a better overall skill set, plays better defense, can play a number of positions, and just gives you that versatility off the bench. The Cubs should look at guys like that in addition to, starting lineup anchors, starting pitchers, ace relievers, things like that.
Yeah, I think the Moncada thing is like what a fall for this. I think it's a cautionary tale on prospecting. This
Yes.
is this is a guy that was unilaterally received as the next coming of a great baseball player, and like he had some weird just injuries. He had some issues with COVID that really derailed his power and like changed his ability to hit the baseball. And he's not stayed healthy. He's not been able to really recover from that mindset. The power has been sapped. He's still only 29, and he's got the tools in there. Just whether or not he's able to kind of tap into that. And yeah, that's why the price point is so low. But yeah, like that versatility, that's something I feel like the Cubs would be interested in. I think it's interesting. I think about this a decent amount with Craig Counsell specifically, that he played a lot of, I would say, like platooning in Milwaukee, and a lot of that probably has to do with like how creative they had to get to replicate large market production. And then the other part of me is like, well, then like, they had all these options, they were able to play matchups, and I'll be very interested to see if the bench is a focus and a restructure for that reason. And it is interesting too, like looking at the Cubs roster and just how, at least, last year it kind of reared its head of, there's a lot of guys on this roster that have like fit that everyday mold. Like Dansby, obviously he was injured. Like you'd have to drag his dead carcass off of that shortstop spot. Like he's like an Iron Man.
And they may have to.
Yeah, correct. Like that's probably how he ends his career. And like he's just and like that's a valuable trait of being an Iron Man. But like then when the production saps or like the defense falls apart or those types of things, like spelling him is going to be better for the Cubs. And there's just a lot of guys on this roster that like just are very locked in to having to play every day. So like that versatility as a roster like doesn't really exist. And like I would be completely okay with that concept, but like there's not like a superstar there that like is like locked in. They're just like very good baseball players locked in these spots. So
well, I've been watching Dansby especially. He prides himself on playing every day. I love that attitude. I grew up watching Cal Ripken and guys who had that mentality. Rhino had that mentality every day. Yes. But I've seen since he came here, 2023, he was kind of struggling. He got off to a quick start, then kind of struggled, had that injury. When he came back from the injury, he went on a tear because he was rested. He plays so much better when he gets rest. He was so much better the second half of the season when they were having that regular day off. And he's 30 now. Like he's not 26-year-old Dansby Swanson anymore.
yeah, and this is a guy that's carried the burden of like being anointed the next Jeter when he was drafted and then immediately traded. Yeah, and like in one of the later moves. Like this is but yeah, I mean he's got a good head on his shoulders, quite literally has beautiful hair. Like way to go, Dan. Congrats. But like yeah, I think it's the bench is gonna become a very key part of being able to spell some of these guys. Like to get like baseball is a long season, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And like yeah, sure, you play every day in the playoffs. Like that's fine. That's why you're there. But like Like, put the ego aside. Like, get to the playoffs. Like, get to the
And
playoffs healthy.
think back to 2016, 2015, 2016. How many times, well, not an everyday starter, but like Chris Coughlin comes off the bench or Tommy LaStella, those guys just got regular work. And when you have regular work, you have a much better chance of coming up in a big spot to come in for somebody who goes down with a leg injury or pinch hit situation.
Yeah, and I think that was definitely something that I would, say from afar, like was one of the biggest issues with the Cubs bench was that like I didn't really like feel this confidence when some of these guys would come off the bench and pinch hit and stuff for that reason. Like the regular reps weren't there. And then like I feel like I've played the game of baseball. I'm not going to imply that I'm a great baseball player, but like you take your first at bat in a really long time and like you swing and like something feels weird or like you're like
Yeah.
maybe if I get a really good hit here, I'm going to get more at bats. Like if I do like there's just all like baseball's such a mental game like designed around this high construct of failure. So like you need to get reps for these guys if they're going to be a
You do.
valuable part of the team. So yeah, like just addressing the bench and using it to your advantage instead of
Yes.
having them like as quite literal bench warmers as it felt in 2024.
Yeah, they're bolted in place. I've seen they're bolted in place. The bench isn't going to float away. So
So that leads us to my second player and the last player on this discussion for today. I've been thinking about specifically. I wanted to look at a player to trade for, and full disclosure, we recorded this episode with some other folks, and I screwed up the editing. So like I had a different player, so you might be a little shocked by this one. But
no worries.
my new player for this episode today is Jack Flaherty.
Oh, interesting.
The argument for me here, a lot of it is he addresses a need of having more strikeout stuff in the rotation. I think based on like some of the tea leaves that are out there, the contract and like how he's ranked in the tier of starting pitching is something that might be achievable for the Cubs. Still only 29 years old. This is a guy that at one point when he was on the Cardinals, stands the legendary stories of him throwing warm up pitches against a mattress in the wall in the hotel during COVID. This is a guy that did show front end starter stuff, and he really kind of has shifted his pitch mix in his time with Detroit and his time with the Dodgers. And I do find it intriguing, especially knowing like how well regarded the pitching infrastructure is with the Dodgers. Players talk about all the time that they just do things
Hmm.
differently. Like maybe like bring him in and find out what they're doing, find out what they told them. Like, and then they also can address something that they're looking at. Like they had his fastball rate went up about 3 points last year. His slider rate went up about 5 points last year, and then his curveball went up usage went up about 2 points. He just abandoned the cutter, and like he has a changeup and a sinker that he mixes in, but like we're talking like single digit percentage. Like it's rarely there. And one of the big things, if you look at his like baseball savant page, like he has a very consistent and stable vertical movement on his pitches. And
Hmm.
interestingly enough, like it looked like his fastball had some slight like downward movement before, and like in 2023 to 2024 he switched it from like a negative 1.7 release on vertical movement to a point 0.1, so like a very level planed fastball. And like looking at his results and the usage rate and the run value of his knuckle curveball, the run value of his fastball, like straightening that fastball out has changed how they perceive his breaking stuff. So yeah, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, this is a guy that is, striking out guys at 29-30% clip in the past. He's got a 32% whiff rate. He doesn't walk people. His hard hit rate is pretty solid. But, at the end of the day, this is the type of guy that if you add to the Cubs rotation, I'd be pretty happy about it. And I think it's going to be something that's affordable. And we're not giving away anything in the farm system to address it.
Yeah. I think it would take me about probably 4 starts to stop hating him from the Cardinals days. But hey, last time we brought in a former Cardinal starter, we won a ring. So
He didn't come
not
for
going
the
to argue.
haircut. So he came for the So I think
Um,
that's I think it's a good place to leave it. Um, where can people find you on social media? And do you want to plug any coming content for CubsPS Plus?
Sure. I've got a couple episodes out recently. You can find me at CubsPS Plus, all spelled out, everywhere. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Twitter X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky, Threads. When Twitter had their technical issues like a year ago, I got on all the other platforms, and now it's paying off because now I'm picking up Blue Sky followers. So, hey. Last week I had an episode where Sarah Sanchez from Cup of Cubby Blue, and she writes for Bleed Cubby Blue, came on my show, and we did a kind of a walkthrough of kind of a thought exercise of redoing last off season. So we took the same budget that Jed spent and looked at free agents and used what they actually got paid last year. We figured that's the market. That's what it would have taken to get them, and plugged in some different mixes. We had a lot of fun with that. It kind of changed the way I look at off-season work a little bit. Put an episode out yesterday sort of talking about the bullpen, and they have a number of guys with non-tender deadline coming up tomorrow. By the time you hear this, you'll probably know who's non-tendered. But the Cubs have a number of relievers who looked interesting but also don't have options, so that's going to play into some of those decisions. But now I try to be about a weekly podcast. I'm out there to find me, search for Bleacher Bunch. I'm on the Bleacher Bunch Network along with the Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, Baseball Rabbit Hole, trying to get some good content out there with Danny Rocket, Michael Cotton, Sarah Sanchez, Infield Fly Girl. And it's a good time. So look us up.
Awesome. Everybody check it out. Follow them on all those socials. Thank you so much for being here. This has been another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. Thank you so much, and enjoy the off season while you can, and go Cubs. Thank you for watching another episode of Bricks Behind the Ivy. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Bricks Behind the Ivy is available for our Patreon subscribers, including Sun Ranto, Danny Rocket himself, and Mike Waller, who are Patreon subscribers. Thank you for your support. Bricks Behind the Ivy is also brought to you by Yagi Road Roasting Company. Why not make the coffee you drink just as special as the moments you drink them in? Yagi Road Roasting. Use the link in the bio to order some of your coffee today. And Bricks Behind the Ivy is also brought to you by Wrigleyville Sports, the best sports memorabilia store in Wrigleyville, right across from the ballpark. Use the code IVY10 today. Yes, IVY10 to get 10% off at checkout. Until next time, go Cubs!